Just after 7 o'clock, so going to say hi to Joan. Lots of people are on at the moment. Hi, Joan.
How you doing?
How are you?
I'm
Uh,
good, and yourself?
yeah, not too bad. Delighted to be having this chat to you this evening, Joan. Um, Joan, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but just for introduction, Joan is was one of the first SENOs in Ireland. Is a secondary school teacher and an independent consultant, teacher trainer, and works for the Middletown Centre for Autism and has all sorts of other accolades under her belt, an author and contributor to many publications, researcher, and so on. So, um, Joan has kindly agreed to talk to our parents and teachers and carers this evening, and the theme is inclusive classrooms, Joan. So I think everybody here is just like, I think in the last couple of weeks, maybe even the topic is really at the forefront of people's minds. There's a lot of kind of conversation around our children and their educational setting and all of that. So it couldn't have come at a better time, Joan. Thank you so much for doing it. I'm going to hand it over to you now. I'm going to look at the chat bar, see what questions are coming in or comments or whatever. Um, and if you need anything, just give me a shout, let me know.
I've just AI sent you a request to allow me to share screen so I can put up the slides. Oh, I think I can share now. That was quick. That's great. Now, can people see the slides? Excellent. Perfect stuff. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out on a, what is it, Wednesday evening to come along to this talk. And I know that Nessa is going to look after the chat bar because when I have my slides up, I can't really see it. So if there's any questions that come up as I'm going through that are need to be answered there and then, Nessa can hop in and let me know. Otherwise, we can have a bit of a discussion at the end. I think the plan is that I'm supposed to talk for about 40 minutes, maybe 35 now because we're at 5 past, and that then we'll take some questions. So I'm just looking at my watch so that I won't go on for too long and we'll have time for questions. So can everybody hear me? I suppose, yeah, all okay. I'm seeing a few thumbs up. That's brilliant. Perfect stuff. So welcome along. So neuroaffirmative values and inclusive classrooms. What I'm not quite sure of is what the ratio is of teachers to parents here. So I'm going to assume we've got both. And I think this is going to be available on the Neurodiversity Ireland site afterwards anyway, so people can refer parents or teachers to it who it might be helpful to. Hopefully something will be helpful. So I've already been introduced, but just I'm going to go through a little bit of it just to give you a journey, an idea of my journey as to understanding my own neurodivergence, which I suppose I'm still understanding. I still am a sister to a wonderful man who is autistic with very complex support needs. He needs support needs for every aspect of everyday living. And he loves tea, he loves shiny things, he loves drives in the car. He's going to be 60 this year, which is quite frightening. And we'll probably have a picnic to celebrate. I was a secondary school teacher for years. I became one of the first seniors in Ireland, as Nessa said. I did a master's in autism over in Birmingham and met autistic people. And pennies began to drop because prior to that, I'd only discovered autistic people like my brother who had major learning needs as well and major support needs. So had very visible differences. And back then, autistic people were really the learning disabled people who nobody knew how to teach. They were the people who were getting the label. The rest of us weren't. So after that, I found out I was autistic. I set up the Autistic Paddies, which is a group for autistic people in Ireland. That lasted until after COVID. There were 600 adults there. An awful lot of them were parents who found out that they were autistic based on their children. So the teacher might call them in to describe certain things that their children were doing in class. And the parents were thinking, but sure, I was like that in school too. Why is that a problem now? But of course, life has got so much busier now, and curricula have got so busy and restricted that suddenly being different has become a bit more complicated or maybe less accepted than it was before. And of course, politically, we're living in a time when not too far west of us, being different is a real problem, and that's going to hit us here too. I work independently as Posautive, but I do work for Middletown Centre for Autism 2 days a week. And I just find it so difficult to separate autism from neurodiversity as a whole. I wonder if there is an autism, but we'll talk more about that tonight. So, while I am very familiar and always learning about autism and contributed to learning from autistic teachers, I am very interested in difference as a whole. And I think once you start learning about one difference, you need to have to support your child's difference or your student's difference is often nice to have for many more children. And how can we make our classrooms more affirmative for everybody? And also, I met Nessa through the Autism Strategy Advisory Group, which was one of the nice things about that group. And just have a little picture there of Leans. The Leans curriculum is a curriculum all about neurodiversity that I was part of putting the materials together for. It kind of treats neurodiversity like any other protected characteristic, like race, like religion, like gender, and looks at what are the differences in the class that we might encounter because our classes are neurodiverse places. They've got children who fit in, and they've got the neurodivergent children whose needs aren't met always. And by the way, if you're ever stuck about neurodiversity and neurodivergent, or neurodiverse and neurodivergent, people often get in a tangle about that, and therefore they are afraid to speak up at all. Don't mind if you make a mistake, but if you actually take away the neuro and just say diverse or divergent, it kind of makes sense then. But to me, the neurodivergent ones, I'll come to that in a minute actually, about what it is. This is just a little bit more about me and my brother. It was a campaign for As I Am, which is an autism organisation we have in the country, a couple of years ago, just to show my brother has big learning needs. I don't have so many obvious learning needs. So it was one sister, one brother. One loves shiny things, one doesn't usually notice. One is a teacher, one doesn't know what school is. One loves a spin in the car, one gets travel sick. One trains people about autism, one never heard of it, but we're both autistic. So I'm going to talk a bit today as well about what is it that's the common feature of our autism. What do we have in common? Because there's arguments as well right now about sort of the bright autistics versus the profound autistics, and that we're taking resources away from the people who might need it. And we won't fully address that, but we look at what's in common and why we might all have difficulties, and why we might all shine as well. By the way, one of the things I like is growing things. So my amaryllis wouldn't flower at Christmas, and it flowered this week. So I thought, yay, I've got a webinar. I'm going to put it right in the flowering line there. So one of my interests. Anyway, in terms of difference, so Professor Jonathan Green in the UK was one of the leaders in CAMS there, very tied into the medical view of autism. And the medical view of anything is medical is what's wrong with you and how can we fix it? And so over the years, mixing with other autistic people, he came to the idea of the fact that autism wasn't just what was thought. And in a paper that you'll get the notes afterwards, I presume, and I've got the reference to the paper. He says, we're at a time of unparalleled flux in our understanding of what autism is and how to respond it. And that was written in 2023. And he also says most interventions, and of course you intervene with things that are wrong with people, most interventions in current use have no good evidence of effectiveness. They were just done, and that was that. And so he wrote that in 2023. And just, I wanted to get a photo of him. I couldn't find a photo. And the one I got was from a video. And of course, there was a little bit of writing in it, which basically said we need to also include children when we're researching autism. We need to include autistic children. And if we're researching any kind of difference, because when I was a SENO, there were so many children who didn't have labels. Didn't have the label of autism or ADHD or dyspraxia, but the teacher was saying to me when I was going out looking for over SNA reviews, they were saying, this child has more needs than the child who we're applying for, but we can't apply for them because they don't have any paperwork. So looking at what's different about people without labels is really important. So my understanding of the neurodiversity paradigm, the way of shifting sands, so we're looking at things from a different angle. All people have unique brains. Every person's brain is to be equally valued. The person who is an Oxford professor should be valued as much as the person who maybe is not able to walk and their brain isn't able to help them speak, and we don't know if they can learn well or not. They have equally valid brains. Supporting all of our students to learn and to be included is a human rights issue. It's not just being nice to them, it's a human rights issue. And collectively, society is better when everyone is included. So my brother he spent 2 days in school in the 70s before he got expelled. So he isn't very well formally educated, but the calmness that he brings, the appreciation of shiny things that he brings. I mean, he doesn't have to be a person who brings things or gives things to other people to be valuable, but he's very valuable in his own right as he is. And of course, then a student or a teacher or a parent can be neurodivergent without any medical label or diagnosis. And any of you who are part of big families or part of big schools, you know that no two adults there are the same, and no two adults there respond in the same way. If your needs are mostly met, you're probably neurotypical. If your needs aren't met much of the time at all, then you're probably neurodivergent. The history, the awful history of what is wrong with people. Autistic people landed up in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the medical model, the model of what was wrong with us. And initially they had what they called the triad of things that were wrong with us, the triad of impairments. They've reduced that to two now by squashing two of them together. So if you're autistic, you've got communication difficulties, social understanding difficulties, restrictive, repetitive behaviours, if you listen to the medical definition of autism. But is that useful? It doesn't lead anybody anywhere, and it led teachers in the past to try and fix the faulty communication, make the autistic people like others, to fix the social understanding, to fix the restrictive repetitive behavior. So let's see if there's a different way we can look at difference and then therefore look at all kinds of difference. This quote here came from a friend of mine, Dave. He's an autistic dad to three multiply neurodivergent kids. So autism, dyspraxia, ADHD, sensory differences, speech differences, all into the mix. And he says, a lifetime you wondered what was wrong with you and the things you did and the thoughts you had and the words you said, because you were wrong in so many ways. Everyone said so. So the attitudes to difference don't tend to be very good. In fact, these tend to be the attitudes to autism, very negative things, lacking theory of mind, unsociable, cold, no empathy. And our kids are absorbing those messages all the time. When in terms of autism and various other differences, they could equally be getting these messages: detail-oriented, focused, good-hearted, resourceful. And neurodiversity is all about knowing that we have, as humans, we all have differences in doing things, we all have limitations, we all have skills. How do we find the best way to approach our students? How do we support them as they are? That's being neuroaffirmative. That's supporting them in acknowledging that there can be difficulties, acknowledging that there can be big difficulties, but also that there are ways to approach the person as they are and to enable them to access the world. So one of the lenses I want to look at that's far away from the medical lens, and this was a theory devised by autistic people, and it's the use of attention and focus in autism. And back when people were trying to find out why autistic people were so wrong, this theory was just why autistic people were so different. Because if we know why people are different, then we can support them. And it was devised by three people, and it was first published in this paper, Attention, Monotropism, and the Diagnostic Criteria for Autism in 2005. And so it was all about monotropism, which was the way people paid attention. And if you know how we pay attention, well, then you've got the key how to reach us and to teach us. These are the three people who developed it: Dinah Murray, Wen Lawson, who's still around, and Mike Lesser. The two on either side are not around anymore, sadly. So a bit of a big word, but what does monotropism mean? It means that the mind, all of our minds, use all of our processing resources to focus on things. And if you're monotropic, your mind uses all of the processing resources to focus on just one or a few things, rather than the majority which focuses their attention around. If you're a teacher, you might have occasionally told your class to pay attention. You might have said it to your kids as well. So pay attention. The only other thing we pay is money. And so we only have so much attention. When it's gone, it's gone. It's like the ad. So most people can flit and float their attention around from one thing to another thing. Autistic people pay attention to one or a few things. That can lead to intense special interests that are experienced in a deep and compelling way. We love our interests, but some kids stick with those interests for life and become adults who stick to those interests. Other kids don't, but the thing is, the quality of the attention when it's on a certain thing is much deeper than other people's attention. And because of that, it's difficult to focus on other things. And because of that, we miss out on stuff. So back then, they used the theory of monotropism to explain that famous triad of impairments, as it was at the time. They used it to explain why we had communication problems, because we were missing out on a lot of stuff, why we had social understanding problems, because we were paying attention to certain things, why we had what are still called the restrictive repetitive behaviors. And I'm not even going to go into that because I don't think there's any point, because as an autistic person, did I mention that? I don't necessarily see a whole lot of use in this framing. This was a quote from that original paper, though, and it was: the demand of having to pay attention to so many things simultaneously is a nightmare. We tend to focus upon one thing at a time, and this might mean we miss lots of superficial information that gives context to so much of life, like conversation going on around us, or what's expected of us, or realizing things. So that was from the original paper, and I just thought it was worth including. Even though they were explaining themselves in terms of being deficient, it can also be a useful thing to know about some autistic people. Interesting then, jumping on a little bit to the 2020s, was 21 or 22, this happened. The monotropism questionnaire came out. The monotropism questionnaire was because some people thought, well, if autistic people are monotropic, how about having a test for monotropism? And if all the autistic people ended up being monotropic, well, then maybe instead of going through this, are you socially and communicationally disordered, we could just do the monotropism questionnaire, and then we'd know who the autistic people were. So 37 questions were administered online, and you accessed them through Twitter, as it was then. Also, as part of this original test, autism screening test, the people who participated were asked to try out these autism screening tests, but they were also asked, were they autistic? And they were asked, did they have ADHD? But the only screeners used at the time were for autism. And there were 1,110 participants. 2/3 of them were autistic. So what did they find out? They found out, sure enough, autistic people tended to be very monotropic. But just to confuse things, ADHDers tended to be more monotropic. And ADHDers were the most monotropic of all. So therefore, it couldn't be a test for autism as we see it now, but it certainly was a test for people who are have focused attention. Perhaps you could think that the autistic people, maybe they internalize that, and maybe the ADHDers externalize it more, but maybe that's too simplistic. Maybe our labeling system is just completely wrong. So, son of Dinah, Fergus, went a step further. Now, he did this before the monotropism questionnaire came along, but because you're probably sick of me talking about autism, I wanted to show that ADHD is now involved before I got to Fergus's piece. And he thought, well, what do we think that monotropism leads to? And again, monotropism is still the same thing. The mind uses all of its processing resources and all of its attention to focus on one or a few things rather than spreading its attention around. And certainly from the autistic perspective, which overlapped with the ADHD perspective, that can lead to focused interests. We love the stuff that we do pay attention to. We love the stuff that we notice. It can also lead to what you might know in school as transition distress, or as a parent bringing your child out to the shops or over to the granny. Transition distress, which autistic people call autistic inertia. It can also lead to sensory differences, which we know are a feature of lots of neurodivergence. And it can also lead to social differences. We relate to each other differently. And I'm going to go into each of these in turn and how they might be relevant to schools. And supports for these things might help other people as well, with other kinds of difference. So first of all, taking focused interests. They're at the core of being autistic, because if we pay attention to one or a few things, our focused interests, if they last for a week or a lifetime, are hugely relevant to how we're taking in the world. And then Rebecca Wood, who was studying how autistic people learn at all, without specifically focusing on monotropism, she found that harnessing interest at schools, rather than stopping the child from learning, it actually enabled learning and progression. So I'm a teacher, and I was pretty much taught behavioral ways of supporting children and of maintaining discipline in my class. We know, and then behavioral ways were used lots on autistic people because people could see that in some respects they worked, but they worked at huge damage to the autistic person's sense of self. So interests in times past were used to, you do the work that we want you to do, and then you can access your interests. So interests were used as rewards, or you do that the work we want you to do, and if you don't, you won't get your reward. So that was not helpful for the child, because if the child has a particular interest, it's not just that they like it, it's that their whole concept base for the whole world comes from that central interest. So I'm a second level maths teacher. I don't work in mainstream school anymore, but when I'd get kids in first year, I'd have a sense of what they were supposed to have learned coming up through primary school. But with the autistic children, you couldn't tell that at all, because whatever they'd paid attention to, they'd framed the whole worldview around that. And that's why it's so important to know what the child's interests are or what they pay attention to. So Rebecca Woods, in her work, found out that there was the advantages of teaching to special interests were many. There was improved learning and curricular access. So rather than depriving a child till they got their work done, allowing them to supporting them, teaching them through their interest, improved learning. It also allowed better cooperation and social engagement. Instead of the staff, the teachers and the SNAs trying to keep the child on task all the time, they were actually talking about something that was meaningful. Instead of people, well, she didn't do her work in homes, but you can just imagine in homes, if you're talking to the child about what they understand, then they're relating to you, and then they're able to, you can introduce other things into the equation, into the picture. The child was motivated and more relaxed. The teacher or the additional needs assistant was more constructively involved. And there was also opportunities for meaningful engagement with peers. Now, parents were concerned about access to a broad and balanced curriculum, but we do have that problem in Ireland in some respects. But isn't that ableist? that all children must access a broad and balanced curriculum. What about our children who want to be specialists in just one or a few things? We don't allow that. Now, luckily, with ongoing education through life in Ireland, if people flunk a leaving cert, they can still find other ways to find their way now. So I'm not so worried as I would have been before about kids not getting the points they need. But our autistic children learn what they want to learn. They don't really take in the rest. And for various reasons as well, exams mightn't always suit our autistic people, but in 40 minutes, we won't go too far into that. Just some examples. I had one child I worked with as a home tutor, and he was completely stressed by school. And he liked small animals. I don't particularly like creepy crawlies, but he did. I like flowers and plants. So we walked lots because he needed to walk to work off his stress, and we developed a shared interest in mushrooms, which do tend to be full of creepy crawlies, but I can handle that because they're mushrooms. As we calmed his system, and it took time to calm his system, he just became more relaxed and more confident in himself. He also knew lots more about mushrooms than me very quickly, and that was okay because I could support him to how to bring his knowledge forward. That young man is back in school now. Not that going back to school is the right thing for everybody, but he's back in school in a youth reach doing a leaving cert now. The fear of being in school and getting a home tutor has relaxed. Flask of tea. My brother relates to the world through tea, as I mentioned, shiny things and the car. So if he has to go somewhere, we when I visit him, we go to places that he likes. But sometimes you've got to go somewhere like a doctor's or a chiropodist or a dentist. If we have the tea, at least he knows there will be tea. It's safe. I can handle that. So that's what his monotropic attention is based on. I worked with one student and he was out of school. When he got stressed, he could really hurt. And he was with the Brothers of Charity from age 16 on. He was with the adult services. But he also had notions that he was not going to do anything in a house. That was women's work when he actually needed a curriculum that would support him to learn to do things for himself. And one day I called to the house and there he was wiping the table, cleaning down the table, rubbing hard, getting great proprioceptive input doing that. And I was amazed. And I said to the person in the house, what's going on here? And I didn't actually need to say anything because he said to me, wax on, wax off. So this guy was interested in cars, and the carers had used that to support him to start doing things in the kitchen. And as he began doing one thing in the kitchen, over time things expanded. Like most people, he liked food and he became a cook as well. Another student of mine liked heavy metal, which is not really my interest, but I'm a child of the AC/DC era. She's not. So with her, she simply would talk to me about her bands before we got into then the academic work. So we had that time. So it was more co-regulation, regulating over talking about bands, and then she carried on with her work. And then another young man who I was working with as a supporter rather than as a teacher loved cars. And this little boy nearly lost his place in school. He was really harming himself badly in school, hurting himself. And during COVID, his teacher was trying to relate to him over Zoom, and he wouldn't relate to him at all. But I found out he liked cars. And the teacher had all his cars from when he was a child. And the teacher linked to him via cars. And by the time schools reopened, they had turned a little side room in the classroom into a room for cars and toys. And the little boy came back and went there. And without us doing a whole lot, we simply created a lovely relationship with the teacher, with him and the teacher. We also provided him with lots of proprioceptive support, deep pressure, because he had a really busy little body. And he just grew back into enjoying school and being calm in school and did not hurt himself anymore. It's obviously his story, so I don't want to go too much into detail of it, but using his interests, developed a relationship with the teacher, and lots more good things came from that. Helen Edgar, who goes by Autistic Realms online, she did some research 2 summers ago on simply just a vox pop on what autistic people found was good about following their interests. So she called it the benefits of an all-consuming hyperfocus. And she got hundreds of responses and basically helps to regulate the sensory system. So a really stressed person can relax with this. Interests are predictable and reassuring in a confusing world. It's a wonderful flow state. It makes you feel happy. You feel in control. You feel less stressed. And of course, you gain knowledge and skills. So using the person's interest can be really helpful. That's focused interest. The second element of monotropic thinking was the autistic inertia. Difficulty starting, difficulty stopping, difficulty changing direction once you've started. In school, you might know that partly as executive functional skills. At home, you might know it as difficulty getting the child to get up in the morning and go to school, or maybe to go out to go places. So what might we do to support that? That's a great reason for using visuals so that the child can see what's going to happen. Even the child who will say, I don't need visuals, I know what's going on. Having a list, having something that I say it's for me because I'm forgetful, but having lists can be helpful. either our visuals or even object schedules as well. Sometimes timers can work. That can be too stressful for some children. You've got to do that on a child by child basis. I use timers to get me started, the Pomodoro technique. I set a timer for 10 minutes, and then once I'm started, I'll keep going. Again, that autistic inertia. You might want a timer for a 2-minute reminder when you're finishing up something. Again, for that inertia, you need a clear room and a task layout. So the child knows what's happening next. So if the child is washing the dishes at home, so you've got the dishes in a certain place, you know where the washing up liquid is, you know where the towel is, you know where they go afterwards. Having those things laid out so they'll be able to follow through in the whole process. Knowing how long the student can focus for before they need to have a break. Some students might need to have deep pressure every 5 minutes or to move around every 5 minutes. Some students might need to do the work running around the place. Using schedules or lists that like visuals. Reminders when finish time approaches for some students. For others, that'll ruin the whole thing for them if you do that. And then having maybe transition activities. So if a child is having to go from one place to another and they don't particularly like where they're going or it's not something they love, have something they like along the way just to make that a bit easier. But all those things can help with autistic inertia and indeed with monotropic inertia. A quote from the original paper. Unanticipated change is truly, if briefly, catastrophic. A complete disconnection from a previously safe state, a plunge into a meaningless blizzard of sensations, a frightening experience which may occur many times in a single day. I was doing schools training yesterday for Middletown, and every time the school bell went off, myself and the parents there all jumped. And we kind of, I suppose if we were in school long enough, we'd know it to go every 40 minutes. But each time it was like a minor electric shock. So all these things can affect monotropic thinkers, jumping out of their skin whenever something happens that's not expected to them. And then the sensory differences. Do we know each student's loves or triggers? And even more important, does each student as they grow up know their own sensory needs? Are they learning to self-advocate? If children are in a special class, if they were in a hearing impairment class, they'd be learning to be the best deaf adults they could be. If they're in an autism class or getting resource hours for being autistic, are they learning to be the best autistic adults they can be? A big part of that is for them to know their own system, and we'll come to Autism Level Up on that. Are they getting the right number and type of breaks they need to regulate? Kids need breaks right throughout the school day, not just when they're getting panicked. That's when it's almost too late. So two things that can help with sensory understanding is number one, the interoception curriculum. Interoception is knowing what's going on inside us. Do we need to pee? Do we need to drink water? Do we need to eat? Are our shoulders tense so we're feeling stressed? Are we feeling confused about something so our head is a swimming? So knowing about what's going on inside is interoception. And there's a lovely interoception curriculum out there that learning about how our body feels then also leads into the actual mental emotions that go along with that. And the interoception curriculum looks a bit like this. They've got lots of experiments. They're over on the right-hand side, like putting your hand in warm water for 15 seconds or in cold water or shaking your hands. And before that, the child has learned a whole lot of words that might describe their hands. They might have given them themselves, or the teacher might have helped them to learn them. And the child then builds up a profile of themselves and their hands and how they feel. They move on to their feet. And there's about 20 different lessons going into kidneys and tummies as well. So they learn all about how their body might feel. Some autistic children don't know, and adults don't know where we begin and where the world and we end and where the world begins and ends. And this can help with that too. But it's also a lovely mindfulness meditation for everybody to do together. It's lovely to do in families or in sessions where you've got a group of children together. But I know I was asked to speak this evening a bit about Autism Level Up, and I'm really excited about the Neurodiversity Ireland talk on Autism Level Up by the people who invented it coming up. So Autism Level Up is all about knowing about your own regulation as well, which ties in so much with sensory experience. And so the summary of it is all energy states are valid, a bit like all brain states are valid. And Autism Level Up links our physical energy states with our emotions as well, a bit like interoception. So this part on the right here is their energy meter. And they have 6 different energy states, and a child might use their own words for them, going from maxed out and frenzied down to asleep. Because sometimes in school, you see the child must be calm and focused, and if they're not calm and focused, it's not good. But in Autism Level Up, all of the states are good. But just you might not want to be maxed out and frenzied if you're sitting down doing a maths problem, or you might not want to be asleep at the same time. Why all these funny pictures here? Because it was the mushroom boy who likes his insects. So he was unable to tell me what emotion he felt ever. But he was able straight away to tell me about what kind of an animal could you describe that would be maxed out and frenzied. And it was the devil's coach horse. I wrote in the words there because I had to learn devil's coach horse. It was new to me. What kind of animal would be amped up and fidgety? A centipede. He was able to give me these words straight away. Now, I don't fully know what each of those words meant to him, but the important thing is they meant something to him, and they were from a very relaxed state up to a very amped up state. And with this meter, you would ask him every day what state he was in. And then we'd look at the activity we were planning on doing and look at, well, what energy does that require? And then we'd see did the energy match. And if it didn't, we might look at what kind of input would his body need to level up or to level down. But you'll be learning lots more about that from Autism Level Up. And it's non-judgmental. I think I spelled that wrong. It's a neuroaffirmative way of helping students to understand their own regulation. This is another piece from Autism Level Up. And so it's those different states again, maxed out and frenzied, amped up and fidgety and so on. And a child who doesn't really know their own state, you can start off by looking at, well, what do others see, hear, and observe when I'm in that state? With the child's permission. They might really like that to be done. And then what I feel or experience. And then where does it feel right for me? So maxed out and frenzied is good sometimes. Asleep is good sometimes. So when do these things feel good? And I've forgotten what a gruntle means. The Autism Level Up people will tell you. So that's just another part of their resources. All of their resources are freely available online, but they've now put them together into a book because they're scattered online. And this is just putting everything together. So on the left there is a child themselves, rather than maxed out and frenzied, they put their own words on, hyper over the top. So it's as it's as switchable around as you want for the child that you're working with. This is too small to see the regulator, so I've just expanded it here and it's very fuzzy. But it's looking at, so that says vestibular, your balance sense. And it's all these different things that you can do. So the first one says jumping up and down. How does it change my energy? Is it soothing? Is it neutral? Is it alerting? And then, do I like it? Is it yuck? Is it okay? Or is it wonderful? So these are all available for you to print off online. So that it's basically a sensory profile that a child can do for themselves or that you can help them with. And then we talked about powering up or powering down if the child's energy doesn't match the activity. So people make their own resources for that. So a self-regulating child might know, I need to run, I need to stretch, whatever it is. Maybe with somebody else, they might need help to get some food. They might need to have compressions. They might need to help to go to a list. Or maybe then mutual regulation, they might put their hands up and ask for help. They might tell somebody. So just different ways of getting the help the person needs. This is all part of Autism Level Up, which all helps with sensory regulation. And the fourth element of being monotropic was communication differences. So are we listening? When somebody uses their body, are we paying attention? When somebody messages us on a phone, are we waiting for them to talk or saying you must talk to us, or if they're writing? If somebody's using speller, do we believe that they are using that? They were disbelieved for a very long time. If somebody's using gestalts, and the best training on Gestalt is also available from Neurodiversity Ireland. Marge Blank, who was one of the best trainers, has that on their site, has covered 2 webinars on their site. I don't think so. As my friend's child, somebody drove the wrong way going down from the school he was in. And I think it was his first words he uttered. And he said, I don't think so. He hadn't spoken up to then, but I don't think so is what Mickey Mouse says when something goes wrong. So he was in a situation where it was appropriate. Mickey Mouse would have said, I don't think so, let's fix this. And this little boy used his words there. So to find out more about Gestalt, go back to Neurodiversity Ireland. But again, all of these communication differences, when a child has their own Gestalt, are we finding out from their family what they mean? I have another friend who communicates in memes. So the therapist says you need to let people in. Person says it's not locked, but the cactus is on the handle. So she communicates that way. And also, does your child have an AAC device if they're not using words all the time? We're coming up to April when the programs for AAC devices are often cheaper or freer. They should be in every class. And if we have them, we should be using them out as well as in. For children who don't speak English, they can be helpful anyway. So we need to normalize more the use of devices to communicate. And then, of course, we can have children with complex communication devices as well. So what does monotropism do to our communication? It makes conversation difficult all around unless interests match, because we can get bored very easily. It can mean a person might miss learning about when to talk, what to talk about, back and forth conversation. So we like to talk about our interests and not so much about other things. So interest-related conversations can be easier. And that also applies to the non-speakers. So remember the kids who I worked with a child using lamp communication, and her thing was Paw Patrol. So I had to do a crash course in Paw Patrol. No, no job too big, no pup too small, and put those quotes into her device. And then when she would be typing out things, I had to ask her family, what does it mean? Because it was often a gestalt. So it was a phrase associated with a whole situation, not necessarily directly what the words meant. So in groups, there can be too much going on for focused thinkers, so much to pay attention to, so they can't manage that. I certainly can only manage one-to-one conversations or maybe one-to-two. And then specific autistic communication exists too. I'm not going to go into that today because there isn't time, but look up the DART research with Catherine Crompton, which blows out of the water the fact that autistic people are a communication deficit. So what can we do about communication? We can have topic tables at break times so our kids can talk about the things they want to talk about. And we do tend to separate our kids out by class group, which is obviously the easiest thing to do a lot of the time when you have a lot of people. But autistic people aren't that bothered about age. We're bothered about interest. So really good to have topic tables, maybe for kids from a few different classes together. Having games and art groups at the unstructured time, so things that the child can actually do. Role play groups can be fun as well. Having lightning talks where there's a series of children who talk for 1 or 2 minutes on a topic of interest to them, and it also expands the ideas for topics for other children. A presentation just on their interest to the whole class. Having a talking stick in group conversation, so you know when it's your time to talk or not. And that's a nice Indian talking stick I have there on the top. Or having a turn-taking circle as well, so the arrow points to the person who should be talking. Giving time to talk about interests, so that if you're at home and the child, you know they talk an awful lot about stamps and you like to hear a little bit about stamps, but not as much as they want to tell you, but do set time when they know this is safe time to talk about stamps. Use whatever modality works for the person, if it's talking, if it's writing or whatever, and use their gestalts. And also adapt their gestalts as time goes by. So I don't think so, or I don't believe so. You can change around the words over time. You can mitigate gestalts, but you learn all about that in the other gestalt training. Another quote from the original paper. If I thought a thought, I believed others would know what I was thinking. Therefore, they must have known what I needed. Failure to meet my needs resulted in my feeling angry and unimportant. Even now, as an adult, I need to frequently check this out. That's from Wen Lawson, who's a professor in a university and who still needs to know that things need to be said out. So sometimes our young people might need support with that as well, that they've taught something, but we need to hear what it is. And that can be an issue that needs support for our autistic people. Just overall, looking at difference, looking at neurodiversity. The rainbow diagram here was done by Spectrumy on the Aspergian, and they defined these as being all the differences we need to look at if we were looking at autism. But of course, it applies to other differences too. So at pragmatic language, pull up your socks, or I didn't say you did that. I didn't say you did that. I didn't say you did that. That kind of thing. Social awareness, monotropic mindset, information processing, sensory processing, repetitive behaviors, neuromotor differences. Now, before actually we go any further with the repetitive behaviors, because it's an awful phrase, autistic people tend to call them spins and stims. So our spins are our special interests. The SP is special and the IN is interest. And the stims are our stimulatory behavior that keeps us regulated. So it's much less judgmental. But to that list, I also added on the following words. And I just think if any, in a teacher in a class or people in a family, if we know these things about the young people in front of us, that gives us the key to supporting them. So emotional empathy and cognitive empathy, because for a long time it was said autistic people lacked empathy, which is such an awful thing and makes you feel so badly about yourself. But actually, autistic people can feel enormous emotional empathy. But the cognitive empathy, knowing that because another person is roaring laughing, they're really excited about something, or they're jumping up and down, they're really excited, or they've got tears, they're sad, that might sometimes need to be explained to people directly so that they can then add that to their repertoire, add that to their monotropic attention mindset. Anxiety can sometimes go along with being autistic because there's just so much to be trying to figure out all the time. Tolerance. So how long can your child tolerate sitting down? How long can your child tolerate running around? That's really important to know about all our children. Organizational abilities. They used to say autistic children lacked executive functioning. It might not be untrue, but we're not the only ones. So for classrooms to be set up, assuming that children have executive functioning difficulties can make things so much easier. Focus. Is it monotropic? Is it not? Interoception. Does the person know what's going on inside them or not? Neuroception. Does the person have a sense of being threatened as soon as somebody comes near them, or do they have a sense that all adults are safe people? And how do we build on that for our very stressed children? Regulation. Does the child know what they need to be able to sit and learn or to be able to sit at a table and eat a meal? Stimming. What kind of stimming does the child do? What does it mean for them? My brother's hand language or his stimming is a hand language. And then masking is huge and deserves a whole talk in its own right. The fact that a lot of our children trying to be like everybody else are masking their needs, and it may not even come out until they're adults. So again, things like the LEANS curriculum support our children to know who and how they are and what differences might be in their classes and how that's acceptable. So if we had this about all our students, would we need a diagnostic label in the first place? This really isn't about autism. It's about a lot of neurodivergence. So again, back to the start, my understanding of the neurodiversity paradigm. All people have unique brains. Each person's brain is to be equally valued. Supporting all of our students to learn is a human rights issue. And collectively, society is better when everyone is included. And a student or a teacher can be neurodivergent without any medical label or any diagnosis. Don't know if you've come across Dara McDonald. He wrote a wonderful book between his 14th and 15th birthday called Diary of a Young Naturalist. So you can read it a day at a time. And it's one of the most useful and helpful books about autism and about monotropic thinking I've ever read. In fact, I gave it to Dinah, one of the people who invented monotropism, and she gave it to all her grandchildren. So Dara is now a student in Cambridge of natural history, and he's been on Chris Packham's show a little bit as well. If you've got teenagers, he's on a lovely BBC Sounds radio program called 1800 Seconds on Autism. Um, and so just he really demonstrates that using a strengths-based approach rather than a deficit-based approach to teaching autistic students works. So why would we be looking at the medical model, and when people get their original reports of their children explaining all the things they can't do, looking at the strengths is how we support our children. And he says when young autistic people are nurtured and accepted, miraculous things can happen. But when any child is accepted as they are and understood as they are, miraculous things can happen. This just came out today, or I just saw it today. It is a piece of research done about autistic mothers' experiences of interacting with schools for their autistic children. Now, the research was about autistic parents, but the only people who responded were autistic mothers. And so it says strong, trusting relationships between school and families are possible when autistic parents feel safe and when their knowledge and lived experience are taken seriously by educators. Because I mentioned at the beginning that in the autistic paddies, a lot of parents discovered they were neurodivergent after their children. And so if you're a teacher with a neurodivergent child, very likely the parents are neurodivergent too. So there's a term called ableism, which is basically having certain expectations about how things should be and assuming that disability is a bad thing. Whereas if we can imagine that each family has their own unique ecosystem, and as teachers, what we're doing is trying to support children to be the best they can be, but within the ecosystem that is their family. I've worked with children before who didn't wash very much or who just love farming and didn't want to go to college, and that was their family background. And so we had to enable them to be as clean as they needed to be and to be in school, but not to fuss too much about it because they didn't come from a family that did that kind of thing. And they are farmers and they are organic farmers and they live their lives in that way, and have learned to be cleaner in their own way as they've grown up. But their family had a certain culture, and if I tried to work against that, I was actually alienating the family. So thank you. That was probably a controversial way to end talking about mucky students, but there you go. So thank you very much for your attention, and let's see what questions we have, and maybe we can answer them as a hive mind.
Yeah, no questions in the chat yet, Joan.
Oh
But
dear.
even no, you're okay. I'm sure we can have a bit of a conversation, even ending on that point. There's so many things that when you think about it that were demanded of at school and um are probably is still demanded of in many schools
Hmm.
that really don't serve any purpose. I mean, or they're not, it's not hurting anybody, that if the fingernails aren't immaculate or one huge thing I think is the uniform. So
Yes.
what you feel about the uniform issue, I think I can probably anticipate what you're going to say, but
I suppose where schools have a uniform, I think it's useful for each child to have a uniform, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the uniform of the school. Um, it can match color wise. But some children, I mean, there's no point in being in a class and being tortured by a label or tortured by scratchy clothes. And indeed, I've fought that battle with one of my students in my autism class who just could not wear the shirt of the school, but could wear a pretty old t-shirt in the same color. And I'm saying pretty old because it needed to be well washed and softened to work for him. And we were allowed that, but almost as if it was a big favor. But he was showing up in that every day, and it was his uniform, and he didn't wear it anywhere else. And I thought that was fair enough.
Yeah, because I mean, we always get questioned, on our support group about children who are being, picked on or being forced to wear clothes that are really uncomfortable, not no beyond uncomfortable, that are, almost impossible to wear. And it's
Yeah,
quite hard to understand how, some schools are still so rigid about, it's not the right
yeah.
type of black trouser, it's not the right type of um
I'm really surprised that's happening.
yeah.
Because if they knew the amount of monotropic attention that took, that leaves little left for learning. It's a bit like the old-fashioned eye contact as well, telling the child they must make eye contact. And if the child is making eye contact, well, they can do that, but then their brain is caught up in the eye contact and they don't have any room to learn. So it shows a real lack of understanding. I didn't mention today double empathy. So when I was talking about empathy, that there is that idea that autistic people lack empathy simply because we don't necessarily get how the majority takes in the world and thinks and behaves. And we don't. But the majority world also doesn't get how the autistic or any other neurodivergent person thinks or behaves. So there's a double empathy gap, and it behoves the majority to try and bridge that gap. I mean, today, because it was a talk for Neurodiversity Ireland rather than an autism group, I'm very conscious of the fact that I haven't said very much about ADHD, even though I informally identify as an ADHDer myself, but because I feel that would take an ADHDer. I don't have the full empathy for that until I fully identify it as that, or a dyspraxic person. And I don't have dyslexia at all, so I cannot understand their experience. But I can believe them when they tell me, and I can listen and do what I can to try and support them in school. And that's the important thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm just suggesting that people maybe also look to a talk that, Joan, that you took part in with Davida Hartman, and Jack Kearns and Julie Holmes. It's a long one. It's just over 2 hours. It's on our webinar library, but it kind of dives deeper into some of these things. Some of the things that you were talking about in particular this evening. But one of the questions that's come in, Joan, is have you advice on how to make a preschool classroom environment as inclusive as possible? Any brilliant examples using universal design principles that you could share or that could be researched or visited? One thing I think before I hand over to you, Joan, would be to say to look at the NCSE's relate framework, that's preschool. I mean, it's really applicable to any kind of setting where kids are. So I think that relate framework, even just as a kind of a theory of becoming inclusive, is good. And then environmentally, you might have suggestions. I know one would be to have opportunities for a child to hang upside down or to climb up on something, or, to sit on the floor. I think it's like a menu. It's a menu of kind of choices of things that they can do, and they don't have to do it one way in particular.
And with small people, that's not so hard to do because everything takes up less space. But obviously, you've got to be watching them as well. But if you've got lots of mats on the floor, when they fall, they don't fall hard as well. So they can be moving around that much more. But I mean, little bodies are not meant to be sitting down all the time. So certainly opportunities for movement. And again, having steps, having monkey bars in the doors. There's so many things you can do. Um, I live in County Clare, and we had a surprising when the increase in the assessments for autism came about in the early or the mid 2000s, or around about 2005 on. suddenly children began being recommended a particular preschool, which they shouldn't really be. So I was kind of excited when I was going there, and I was expecting a very structured place, a very set sort of teach principles organized place, but it wasn't. It was a flow as you are space. And it's still going strong. And the person who runs it probably should be retired about 10 years ago, but loves it too much. And it was just a place where children were let be themselves. And were just understood. So there was plenty of toys, there was plenty of space to move. There was a structure there, but it was very, very loose. It wasn't hopping from one thing to the other very quickly. It was lots of free play, lots of story time then. And if people didn't want to sit for the story time, that wasn't a huge problem, but they were encouraged to. And so it was just working with the children that you had. So it was, I mean, preschool is play. And so you want to do what the child wants to play with. Sorry, I'm distracted by a lovely cat. Um, sorry. Oh, he's gorgeous. And obviously, if you've got pets in a preschool as well, that's even better.
That actually brings me to a good point, Joan, that you're making about play. So we on our, again, I'm pushing our library, but it's free. We have a webinar by Jack and Megan, our senior OTs, occupational therapists, about play. And I know it's being taught or being used in Mary Immaculate for training the early years teacher trainees. So I
Brilliant.
don't think you can get better than their kind of explanation as to what play is why play is so important, what play is for neurodivergent children, what that looks like. It can look different. So I think in your setting, if you're embracing all types of play, and we have these funny moments in our parent support group where we might share a photograph of what the play is that day, and it's like not at all the way the toy is meant to be used, but it's a really novel kind of way to use it differently. Or Lego is not being built, it's being sorted. And that's play, and it's just understanding that there are so many different ways to do things that you don't have to do it the standard way all the time. I think that's another.
Absolutely, yeah. And you reminded me as well because Middletown has also a resource about play. But at the time they were doing it, a friend of mine, KB in Scotland, she was doing her master's on autistic play and parent-child interactions. And what she found from interviewing other parent children, she's autistic herself, was because the play sometimes didn't even involve too much doing at all. They might be the child and the parent might be staring outside the window for half an hour and then might make up a story after that, and that they were embarrassed to say it or to say it in schools because they might look like bad parents. But actually, this was beautiful co-regulation with the child. So the play, I mean, we've talked so far about the play being running around the place and tearing around the place, but for the child who literally wants to sit still, but in that sitting still is richly interacting with the environment, is just also as valid as any other play.
Yeah, and I love the outdoor school and the opportunities for being outdoor as well too, because I think like the more connection with nature that you can offer, the more opportunity for regulation that offers as well too, in so
It's so
many ways.
calming for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Um,
there are expensive sensory rooms that are out there now. And I know obviously it takes years for a tree to grow, but every school should have access to a green space. Obviously important, difficult in cities, but you can even create little garden spaces within the school. But
yeah.
we
And
know how valuable nature is for everybody.
yeah, and on your garden point, I mean, I sometimes have to laugh at the sensory garden kind of idea when like every garden is a sensory garden, so if you're giving the
Yeah.
kids the opportunity to play with water, get mucky, plant something, touch bark, trickle their hands through ivy, all those things that are tickling your senses, that I think
Yes.
that's an easy kind of, well, I say it's easy, but it's one way to get that kind of input. Another question for you, Joan, is approaching schools. So I know you've got a good answer in this one when about upskilling. We know their teachers and schools are overstretched, and I know there's no kind of I was kind of flabbergasted to know that there's no central I suppose, guidance coming out from the department about here is how you become more inclusive. It's kind of away you go off on your own and figure it out yourself. So how do you tell a teacher who's obviously stressed and overworked about and who may think that they know all about neurodiversity and they have enough neurodiversity, you know, and how do you let them know that the research has, you know, moved on? We don't teach those social skills anymore. We don't say person with autism. Like, how do you approach that teacher, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's the attitude is the biggest thing. Like, I don't mind the language, call it out politely, but it's the attitude is the thing. And things are changing so fast. And the most scary thing in the world is, my friend said this to me 10 years ago, the person who's taken a short course in autism or who's taken a short course in this or that, because they think they're the expert. And none of us are the expert. I'm learning every single day. I'm learning here this evening. And that's what's so important. The diversity of humans is incredible, but a teacher, and sometimes the teachers who are stuck in certain ways of doing things may even be neurodivergent teachers, and it's the safety of being stuck. There was somebody on the radio last week who was talking about there being too many diagnoses of autism, and she gave the impression that she had struggled her way through life, and therefore other people should too, and not be getting a label for it. And I was pretty sure she was autistic the way she spoke, but that's a whole other story. Um, but
Yeah, I
how to
think,
get through to that teacher, it's slow.
yeah,
Um, and I also think that we really need to be offering a lot of trainings to principals because the culture of a school makes such a difference. And that comes from the top. You can always get the wonderful teachers and the wonderful SNAs who do amazing things. But if they aren't supported from the culture at the top, that can be exhausting for them. Back when I was a SENO, there was one student who had great difficulty coming into school, and the school found out that he liked hens. And the principal would say to me, I know nothing about autism or ADHD, but my resource teacher does, and she's recommended we get hens. And the school got hens and put them in the front garden of the school. And it was in the summer holiday, so this young lad came with his granny and looked after the hens every day during the holidays. So the natural thing was they would follow on with that when school reopened. And it enabled them to go back to school. Now, didn't solve every issue, but the principal there was open to the fact that he didn't know everything, but he was the manager of experts who did, or people who were working on their expertise, and he was going to support them, and he surely did. And that was one example of children in a school. And I'd say there are many children I never heard of who were having a happier school experience because he was working with his staff team well. So when teachers are stuck, I mean, having more courses, you can't, I suppose, unless people are willing to hear, you can't always reach. Um, Sometimes I suppose you need to be specific in that instance and maybe talk about, well, what are the issues? And maybe then persuade the teacher that this thing will make things easier for the child and will be easier for you too in your busy, stressed life as a teacher, because teachers are busy and are stressed. And really things when things go well can be easier for everybody. But
yeah,
of course, sometimes change can be
hard.
difficult to implement. I do notice a lot of teachers putting together resources, and there's a whole bank of resources out there, but yet every year teachers are making the same resources over and over again. It would be lovely if the department had a central repository for lots of resources. And with neurodivergent children, you're always going to have to adapt them a little bit. Like Middletown actually has a whole repository of resources that are there for everybody. But when you get it, it's rare you'd get one that you'd be able to use straight off. You've got to adapt it a little bit, but that's okay to do. But rather than people reinventing the wheel every single year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the teacher, upskilling the teacher who's stretched, I mean, um, you know, obviously you trap more flies with honey, as we've all learned, you know, to approach it on a kind of collaborative basis. Like what can I do to help you? Because you know, I realize you've enough to do, but I have a bit of time I can share, you know, I can share with you this resource that I got from an amazing course about PDA. It's really expensive, but here you go. I'm going to give it to you, you know, for free and share it with you that way. I think it's good to work as collaboratively as possible. I know that's not
Yes.
always possible, but we also have gone to schools to kind of talk about neurodiversity and being neurodivergent in that more up-to-date kind of way.
Yes.
And we do plan to have recorded um, information. And it's not the best way, right? Because it's much easier to sit and listen to you tonight, Joan, than to, you know, to listen to a webinar when you're tired and so on. But we will try and help to get to schools as well too. It's not immediately available, but we're hoping to do that in the near future. I have
Oh, that's
another question,
fantastic.
Joan. Um, About a kid who's lashing out in class, and then sometimes, so it's a young kid, 6 or 7, might not be realizing his own strength, and but very often it comes from this position of injustice. Somebody else is taking my toy, or somebody else is going first when I'm supposed to go first, and I know exactly what they're talking about, and it's becoming a problem. The teacher might be uh, willing to kind of find out more about it. So I'm just wondering, like in my circumstances, I had to tell our teacher, she has to go first. There's literally no point in doing anything else. Just for now, it's only for this season of her life. It's not going to be forever. And it is unjust to her that somebody would take her toy because for her, the toy is part of a whole set. And if you take it away, I don't know if it's monotropic but it's like you're taking away part of
Gestalt.
my world that I'm doing at the minute. So what your views are on, it's that reaction, that kind of high octane reaction to something that doesn't feel fair to the child.
I think usually high octane reactions come from children who are in a high octane space, and they're often the children who need loads and loads of attention and regulation breaks in school. So that if they're getting lots of proprioception and deep pressure and breaks right through the school day, then that can help them to just chill a bit and to develop relationships then with the people who are doing that with them. And there's a lovely book, Mona Delahuck's Beyond Behaviors, where she talks about developing that sense of, I suppose, self-management and self-regulation in children. And it starts from developing relationships that are very trusting with the people in your class. And of course, when you're the child who's the one who lashes out, everybody's a bit careful around you. But it actually requires that unconditional positive regard that not so much like when a child has done something like that, who's lashed out at another child and they've done it in the spur of the moment, they're in fight or flight. And I'm a teacher. We were trained in behaviorism. We were trained in results and in consequences. And so the natural thing would be to say, why did you do that? Wasn't that naughty? We can't go here. We can't do this again. When that's actually not the way children's brains develop. So we know now that children need to, first of all, have very strong, confident, held relationships with adults around them. And then over time, they can start then to access their thinking brain a little bit more so that those sudden moments won't happen so much. But along with that, then they may need also lots of physical regulation in the classroom setting. Every day I hear people saying to me, this meltdown or this thing came out of the blue. And it's out of the blue because the child was at a 9 in a scale of 9 to 10, probably most of the day, and then when they got to 10. Whereas if we're supporting our children to be at a 3 or a 4 throughout the day, then things just become less of an issue. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, Joan. I
Sorry.
was so like I feel like if that child had the if just supported to be first, to be using the toy first, to always, if that support was there, and it looked different for every kid, but if it means that they don't have to stand beside the one with the prickly skin, or they don't have to, whatever it is that's going to make their existence more comfortable and easier in the classroom, as long as you keep doing that, you're going to, and I hate saying build up resilience, but you're going to make them more able in due course to consider, oh, well, maybe I don't have to go first this time. If we talk about it enough that, that it will happen. It's not going to happen right now, but when it does happen, you'll be okay. And they might think about that and, socialize that, and that's okay. And, when it does happen, you might not get that reaction, but it shouldn't happen without their permission or without their involvement in that process.
Yeah, and when they're in their panic brain, they won't be able to think that way anyway. But when they're in that calm brain, then they can be learning from you and learning about turn taking and learning about kindness and learning about others too. But it's got to be when they're not in their panic brain. Spectrum Gaming have a nice resource about panicked brains and calm brains. I just remember Panic Monkey from it as well. You might know it. We might find it, share
Yes.
it here.
Again.
And
Yeah.
Dino Brain, which is when you're back to your prehistoric brain, just in fight or flight. It's a really lovely resource for children to understand how their brains might be working in times like that. Because the other thing is that the child who lashes out a bit also tends to feel a great deal of shame about it and to really dislike themselves, even though it doesn't look to anybody else that that's the case. So the more we can support our children to be in that calm state, so that they can slowly and at their own pace learn how to interact with everybody else in the world, the better that can be.
Yeah, and I feel like 6 is very young for a child who finds it hard to take turns or to let somebody else go first or to share. I feel like that's too soon to
Of
make them do
course.
things like that.
Yeah, and especially our post-COVID children who just haven't had the early interaction with other kids that they might have had, or just even kids now from smaller families. You know, it used to take a village to raise a child, and now it doesn't anymore. So it's going to just take longer, because the children aren't meeting other children and aren't having those interactions. So they'll happen in their own time, and our job is really to support that.
And sorry, this is jumping to the other end of the school kind of life. Got a recent diagnosis. Her son has been identified as autistic and doing the Leaving Cert this year, but he's just stopped going to school. So I think that's going to go back to your point about the relationship and the safety part.
Yeah, I wonder about why he stopped going to school, but I suppose those are more the students I would work with because I am second level. And I presume that the stop going to school didn't just happen of a Monday, that it was coming up for maybe a certain amount of time. Um, what I would say is the child's mental health is far more important than their leaving cert results. And so to be putting off all pressure right now, um, and just supporting them as they are, it's sixth class, it's a or sixth year, it's late time. I'll just tell a story of a young man I worked with who's in his second year of his PhD now. And I met him for the first time for home tuition when he was in sixth year. He hadn't given up going to school, but he'd been so ill along the way that he got extra teaching hours. And he couldn't learn in school at all. He was very stressed by school. And he got an okay leaving cert. He got into university by the HERE system. And then once he got to university, he flew. And as I say, now in his second year of PhD and was getting firsts along the way. So school can be, I mean, I don't know that by circumstances, but school can be a very tough place. And in Leaving Cert, there's a whole lot of pressure all around. Everybody's under pressure, trying to get points, trying to do this, trying to do that. So whatever is going on for that boy, if being in school, if he's avoiding that right now, I would listen to that. And I mean, obviously, you'd like him to be in school, but his mental health comes first. And if possible, he might go into school for his favorite subjects and keep them up, just to keep up some kind of a habit of being in school. But to take the big pressure off, it's obviously a very individual situation, but mental health comes first.
Yeah, and I suppose like he's of an age where he can be a part of saying what it is about school that's not possible or comfortable or doesn't feel safe for him to be part of that um
I hope so. But if he's been masking
rehabilitation.
all his life,
Yeah.
he may not know what it is. That's where interception and autism level up and programs like that can really be helpful to help the young person to know themselves. But as you say, if he is able to articulate, absolutely to 100% take it seriously.
Yeah.
But having got this far not knowing he's autistic, he's very likely a heavy masker. And is he masking from himself as well, as so many young people do?
Yeah, those I'll post those two resources that you're talking about, the Kelly Maller interoception curriculum.
Yeah,
I think would be the should be the starting point for nearly for everybody for everything. And then the level up, I
autism level up.
yeah, the chart. We are having that talk on the 14th of April with Amy and Jack, but and I'm going to ask them then to confirm whether what I think that chart is would be brilliant for everyone. Everybody
Oh
in this
yeah.
should have their own chart, and should
And the teachers.
yeah, and the teachers and be able to say, um, what I need to move from up or to move down. And what, when I need those states that like that's not just for autistic people, right? That's for everybody.
Regulation, yeah.
Yeah. And the point you made to me earlier on, Joan, I thought was really good for this evening. And it goes back to the point about making classrooms or settings more inclusive. The things that you would love to do at home, but you can't because it's chaotic. Where you have children in a setting like that, and you can do a movement break every 15 minutes if you want. You could do 2 minutes of um
Chair
jumping jacks
push-ups.
or chair push-ups or
Yeah, jumping
you
jacks.
know.
They don't require going off to the gym or leaving the class or anything like that. They can be fairly straightforward. And then just thinking of this young man who's in Leaving Cert, another useful resource for people who are able to access their thinking or who can discuss with people is the Ross Green's Explosive Child, or Ross Green's Lives in the Balance. Livesinthebalance.org is his website. It's for students who are considered, or for young people who are considered to be not doing what they should be doing, be they acting out, be they not working, be whatever it is. And it's a kind of a negotiation method for supporting the parents to truly listen to their children, to find out what's going on for them, and then for solutions to be found that work for both parties.
That's
Um,
the CPE framework, I think. And
yes,
all-
CP, proactive solutions, CPS,
yeah, it's like
collaborative, yes,
yeah, it's the
collaborative
state.
proactive solutions, yes,
Yeah.
CPS, yeah,
Um, and I know Casey Ehrlich has definitely is a fan of raw screen, but to say that if you think your child is PDA, has that like persistent
yes,
pervasive drive for autonomy, that won't work at a
no,
time when they're in that fight or flight or kind of
yes,
state where they don't feel like they're autonomous with the person imposing the framework on them. So
very
just
true.
to kind of bear that in mind. I have another question for you, Joan. Constructive problem solving, at CPS. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
or collaborative, is it? Or yeah,
Yeah, collaborative. Yeah.
yeah.
Have you any advice on how to help a student who is hyper focused on one other person or a teacher, and the person is becoming uncomfortable with that? I can say from the person point of view, you might help with the teacher point of view. We had that, and it was because it was like a crutch. It's like very much an anxiety driven thing that like my daughter needed somebody else to do everything with her or just in front of her, or like to be nearly like a human shield because she was terrified of everything. And that person was just had to be surgically attached to her all the time. But the school were brilliant. And in her set minutes would make a different kid go every day. And then she got to choose. And then, it's just been a really lovely way of kind of facilitating her being able to make friends with other people. Whereas before she was just like, I don't know anybody and I'm just going to cling on to you. So it can come from different places, but that might be one. But your view, Joan, on hyper focusing on perhaps a teacher or an adult or
I'm curious about the age of the child, because if it's a very young child, they'll grow through it. As you say, it's like a scaffold. But if it's a teenage child and another teenage child, that can be really awkward. Because the other children are very self-aware as well, and it can, I suppose, really be hard in the first child's reputation. So I'm wondering about the age of the child here.
I'll try and find that out. I
Yeah.
know I'm not sure if it's this question, but I know that we've had this question before for a kid who's in just starting in secondary school. And then when obviously the teacher might get uncomfortable and can, feel like, a bit not anarchy or a bit snarky or annoyed or whatever with the neurodivergent child. And then that is felt so deeply
Yeah.
by the child, and that can result in a I hate you reaction, you're the worst in the
Yes.
world, or, there's strife between the child and the teacher. It's just it doesn't feel like a good kind of scenario to be in.
Yeah. I suppose from the Yeah, I mean, if it's a teacher, I think teachers should be able to take it,
Yeah.
and maybe understand it. If they are the monotropic interest, it will probably move on in time. But they may also, when we talked earlier about using monotropic interests, if the teacher happens to be the monotropic interest, is it because of their personality or because of some interest they have? The teacher may also be able to transfer it on or bring it into a group, or I don't know, if they like the science teacher might be able to set up a science group or something to spread out the interest a little bit among other people, but to find out exactly what it is that's causing the interest.
So the child is 17. I feel like that
Okay.
teacher, as you say, like kid's gonna leave school in a year, like just suck it up for the year and get over it. It's, not the worst thing in the world, is it, to be the focus of somebody's attention? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I presume if it's 17 in a secondary school child, unless they're in a special class, they're also only seeing that teacher for a small part of the day as well. So it's not such a big deal. But they may also want to create a career in that teacher subject. They may idolize them for that reason. So,
Okay.
maybe the teacher is, if every teacher loves a child who loves their subject, might be able to do, work with them by giving them particular work in this, or maybe having a group of a number of children who like the same subject and see where it goes, because then it's diluting the attention a little bit. But yeah, if it's second year and it's a teacher and not a student, if it was a student, it would be more awkward because the students are all self-conscious at that stage. But if it's a teacher, as you say, I mean, suck it up, but also maybe enjoy it and use it to support the children to do even better in your subject.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder what the size of the school, if there's any ability to, the way I'm just thinking back to when we were 17, we would have had like seminars almost like with other teaching staff that, maybe that's a possibility. I'm not sure. Well, that person wants to email us afterwards. We can, try and help further, Joan, if that was
Yeah,
okay with you.
absolutely.
Let me see. So, yeah, another question about, I suppose teachers who really don't really want to know anything about this. I'm sure there's nobody on this talk call tonight that's of that
Yeah, they
persuasion.
wouldn't be here otherwise, so then we're not talking to the people we need here. And there are teachers like that. And I mean, every teacher is obliged to teach every child. So those are teachers who are not doing their job properly, because whatever child is sitting in front of you, you're going to have to try to reach them. And if you can't, then you can look at the school support or the school support plus, but they're still your child in your class. So I mean, it's tough for a child who has a teacher like that. And I have seen children whose confidence grows with teachers who esteem them and whose confidence shrinks with teachers who don't, or who just mask completely in classes and the teacher doesn't know they're there at all. But just the more their word gets out that I mean, certainly at the moment, the government is talking about schools being obliged to open special classes so that every child has a place. I have a bit of an issue with that, because if children are sent to schools that don't want them, that's going to be really difficult. Um, so I suppose I certainly there's also talk this week about in initial teacher education that every teacher is going to be supported to learn about teaching various types of children, neurodivergent children, because up until now teachers haven't learned that, and it's been an aside or an extra or a 1 day part of your 2 year training. So I think initial teacher education can do a lot with that. But there's obviously then 40 years worth of teachers out there in the system who are thinking whatever they're thinking, some of whom are very good.
Yeah.
Um, but
I
just
think
for the few who aren't, it can be very difficult.
can be hard, and I think that I mean we the figure that we love to keep talking about is the third of your classroom are neurodivergent, and I know the Department of Education, their figure is 25%. I mean, I was shocked that they were even, willing to accept that percentage. But what are you going to do with your third who are neurodivergent if you're not prepared to modify your teaching, come up with ways of teaching, include those children? Like that to me feels like an incredible amount of discrimination to take on if you're going to say, well, they're not my I
Responsibility.
I don't know how to do I don't know how to do that. You're a
Yeah.
very smart person. If you're a teacher, you should be able to adapt, and
Well, I mean, again, I'm a secondary school teacher, and we used to say, primary school teachers teach children, secondary school teachers teach their subjects. And but at the same time, when you're a teacher, you should be able to differentiate. And a lot of teachers don't even know what differentiation means. So at a very basic level, differentiation should and could be part of teachers' continuous
training.
professional development even now,
Yeah.
because every teacher is meant to be doing that. And that's been in the circulars that should be happening for 20 years now. And some children mightn't even ever need to be getting assessed or to be going outside for particular resource hours if the subject matter was differentiated from the start. Now, there's also the mismatch between parent and teacher expectations at times, because if you've got a child and a parent has very high expectations of them academically and they're really struggling, and the teacher very kindly simplifies things for them so that they're keeping up but at a basic level, the parents may not accept that. So there's conversations to be had there as well. But I remember one of the first talks I ever gave was a talk on differentiation to a staff, and the two who were not into it were sitting at the front of the classroom. And they said, but if you simplify things, how were they supposed to manage it all? And that same day, we had just got some new speakers, and the speakers had this massive, big instruction thing with them, and we were all trying to get the speakers to work. And then I found the 10 line instruction kit, and that got me through for the day. And so I was saying, well, look, that was all I needed to get the speakers to work. And if I want to learn the technical advice about speakers, I shall then go back and read the rest of it. But that's what we need to be doing in our classes, just giving the very basics, so the child has something to hang their hat on, and then the rest of the learning may or may not come depending on the child's ability. But differentiation, it requires also being organized as a teacher. And I'm certainly a disorganized teacher. And so when I differentiate, it also helps me to put my main points in order. And
Yeah.
indeed, textbooks now, certainly at second level, are already pretty much differentiated because they're divided. They've got so much content and pictures, it's very hard to find the curriculum in them, but it's very easy to break up into small points from them because that's the way the textbooks are now.
Yeah, it's really great point. Like the act of differentiation makes you focus on what are the key things that you need to actually get across the line and how you're going to do it. Are you going to do it through I keep saying that like my and it's not just mine, like lots of kids are into Minecraft and there are opportunities in Minecraft to type and to write signs and to send messages, and that's another way of learning to read and write.
Yes.
And that you could harness that to reach the kid who's not prepared to sit down with the book and pencil and paper or whatever. And sorry, I meant to say, Joan, on that point about forgetting about the academics for a while and just focusing on, is the child happy and safe and regulated? Because nothing will happen before that happens. I think Jack
Mhm.
on our last webinar was talking about Maslow's pyramid, and that foundational part about being safe should be everything, being regulated, being
Yes.
connected. Like that's probably the only thing that you need to focus on with a neurodivergent child for the first X number of years of school life. I'm
I think even the first term, so when people, I often do a talk for the NCSE on teachers who are opening autism classes. And really, it's the job of the first term, or at least up to Halloween and possibly up to Christmas, just to get to know who's in front of you and to enable those children to feel safe in the class because the learning can happen then after that. And it's accelerated once the children are feeling in a safe place to be able to learn. It's when children are nervous and anxious or overloaded sensorially, then they can't be learning at their best. But if you know how the child ticks, then you can support them to be their very best.
yeah. And I think like the pressure then to do the learning is going to just be another demand. It's going to be or impossible. It's not that they're not even, they don't even, it's not that you don't want to do it. It's just going
No,
to
it
be
just
an
can't.
impossible
Yeah.
task. So if I had another request, Joan, if possible, and we might look at maybe doing like I can't have you emailing all across the country, but we might do one email about maybe supporting children who are not going to school, who've stopped going to school. There's a couple of older children in that same situation, and we just have a couple of resources that you could point to. I think Kelly Maller's interception curriculum, and
Mhm.
there she has lots of talks or tips free on her website, as well as the paid resources that might be a good starting point for that.
Yeah, and I've covered a lot of our paid resources, and I think the basic resource on the basic training on interception and their training on interception and trauma are absolute go-tos for anybody. The other ones I've come across are kind of repeats, but
Okay.
those two I really strongly recommend.
Okay.
And another really good resource for children who are not going to school is the Spectrum Gaming website and all the lead-offs from there. Andy Smith, who developed Spectrum Gaming, really struggled in school to the extent that he really struggled with being alive at all. And he set up Spectrum Gaming in the Bury area of Manchester for kids who are not going to school. They're all autistic as well. And they've put together resources, the kids themselves, that they consider to be really useful. Um, so I get a lot of good information from there. I sent somebody an anti-behavior program today, and I got that from there.
I
He
saw
writes
that.
really good stuff, and because they're all youngsters as well, the young people themselves can relate to them.
The Stimpunks Foundation is another place where you can look
Yes,
at the kind of not anti-school, but if your kid is not able to go to school and what a better environment might look like for that child. The Stimpunks Foundation. I will send an email to everybody that's on the call tonight with all the various resources that we've spoken about. But I'm conscious it's nearly 8:30, Joan, and you've been absolutely wonderful. We're getting rave reviews here, and we will definitely have you back. So people are saying thank you, wonderful talk, and the resources are great. Lots of great information, Joan. And people want to take you home with them. So um,
I
thank you
would mess
so
up their house too,
much.
but I'd bring a nice amaryllis, and I'll happily go to the houses with the nice cats.
With the cats. Thank you so much, Joan. It's
Thank
been
you so
brilliant
much. Good
as
night now.
always.
Thanks everybody
Yeah.
for coming along.
Oh, sorry, the level up talk, people want to know it's on the 14th of April. We'll post more information about that in the coming days.
Thanks now.
Thank you, Joan. Talk to
Bye
you
bye now.
soon.
Thanks.
Bye bye.